Hello. We're going to kick off the panel discussions today with the Certifying Competency panel. I'm bringing up some familiar faces from our board to talk about something that's really important to APSCA and our members and stakeholders. I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Stephanie Ragan, APSCA's Director of Code and Compliance. And today I'm bringing back up to the stage Avedis, Linda, Craig, and Rajan. And but I'd like you to talk a lot. Let's see, that seems a little better. Sorry for the feedback. We're just working through the technical glitches. But we're going to talk today about something that's really central to our current position with APSCA and the climate in today's social compliance auditing, and that's the value of APSCA. Today we'll take a deep dive into APSCA's impact on social compliance auditing profession and the broader impact of APSCA's certification and value for APSCA's members, stakeholders, and the industry at large. So thank you, panelists, for being here again and giving more time for our members and stakeholders. Go ahead and get into a lot of questions. We will also have a Q&A session open at the end of our session here. And following this session, we'll go into lunch, and then we'll give you some more information. Our first question is our central question, and that is, what professional value does APSCA certification add for auditors? Avedis, would you like to start us off with that?
If you want me to. What professional value does APSCA certification give to our auditors? You know, actually, Stephanie, I'm going to play with those words a little bit because I think that the question contains within itself the answer. The main value proposition of APSCA, in my mind, is that it defines the profession. We have created, for the first time in the 30-odd years that this industry has been around, a standard, a definition for what it takes to call yourself an auditor. When this first got going, in the mid to late 1990s, anyone could be an auditor. You didn't have a requirement to meet. You didn't have a bar you had to demonstrate you had sufficient competency to prove. You just did it, right? And that's fine when you get started, but when you, as we were saying earlier today, recognize the complexity of the work being done, you will very quickly come to the conclusion that it's not something that just anyone can do, nor should you want it to be something that anyone can do. And so to have that definition, to have that recognition in a way that is demonstrable becomes a value in and of itself. During APSCA conversations, we often compare it to other professions, and the example that I always latch on to, given my personal career, is lawyers and the Bar Association. Not anyone can call themselves a lawyer. You can't just suddenly decide that, oh yeah, I'm good at arguing, I'm going to go stand up in front of a judge and talk. Well, that's an important skill set, but it's not enough, and certainly not something that is granted to just anyone. There's a whole process, there's a rigorous examination, and then there is the requirements that you have to hold on to maintain that appellation of lawyer for the course of your professional conduct. We've never had that for auditors before this, and that is incredibly valuable because you guys know that this is not a job for anyone. And to be able to say now, you can't just call yourself an auditor. You have to demonstrate compliance. You have to demonstrate professional conduct. You have to maintain that qualification. And the way you do that is through APSCA. Through becoming a CSCA, there is great value in that. And to me, as I said, the question contained the answer because the value is in professionalizing the space that we have achieved.
Great, thanks. And I think that, going back to what Ross said this morning about the extra CPD efforts we've made over the last year and brought in already 487 hours, that makes that second half of the value proposition, the continuing education, really important as well. So hopefully that's something that our members find value in. Anyone else would like to talk about value? We're going to talk a lot about value, so I can move on to question number 2. In what ways has APSCA certification contributed to more actionable audit findings that firms and brands can rely on to drive meaningful improvements? Linda, do you mind taking this one?
I think that's a difficult question because we might not be there yet in answering that question positively, that we can identify better results of CSCA auditors. I really want to go back to what was mentioned by one of the CSCA auditors of what does the CSCA mean. It sets the minimum standard. And I think that was really important that it was mentioned in that way, because that is what it does. And also Avedis said that. It sets the minimum standards. It makes it easier for us, say, to compare, to really set the profession. This is the minimum. But we know it doesn't stop there. And we also know that in identifying the issues, it requires much more than just a training by APSCA. It requires a training on the job. It requires many flight hours to be made as a social professional compliance auditor, but it also requires, in addition to that, say, all the information and training required for different schemes. We already heard this morning, RAP scheme, amfori scheme, we heard SADX was being mentioned as a scheme. So in addition to that, there is also the training needed to really audit against the standards that are in these specific schemes, where you will need to allocate, where you need to address your findings towards. I also think it's really important that, say, in having this social, in having these standards, it's competency, it's skill, but it's also the professional conduct that is really important here. And that links back to what was said earlier. It's the credibility about what we are doing. And the credibility is crucial for me at amfori. If I am not credible as amfori, I will not have amfori members to join us. If our auditors are not credible, our members will leave. If the industry is not credible, we will have an issue moving forward. I also want to repeat here again, and the word ecosystem is used frequently, but it was also mentioned in the keynote speak by, where's Lucia? Anyway, she mentioned it on the slide, there she is, where it said there is a lot of more things than just audits. So audits is one tool in the toolbox. So in really finding the issues that we need, an auditor needs to be very well prepared before he or she goes to an audit. So there is already this research information being done up front that helps an auditor to find the issues at hand. But it's also the company, as part of their risk management and their due diligence prioritization, that really sets the standard moving forward. So I think we need to acknowledge here, coming back to your questions, do we already find more actionable, is there more actionable findings? We don't know, because that's part of the research we need to do. But it sets the bar and it makes it comparable, and it gives us an opportunity to act upon if and when an auditor, for example, displays behaviors that we think are not the right behaviors. Anyone else want to comment on that one?
I think you did great. Go ahead, Craig.
Yeah, sure. One thing that I want to point out is that with the changing regulations and the increase in regulations, with the companies I work with, historically, I usually am dealing with the legal and compliance department. So I deal with the general counsels of large companies and things like that. Now with the new regulations, there's a whole internal shift too. So now the legal department, the sustainability department, the supply chain people, the risk management people, all need to talk together for their program to be effective. And APSCA plays a critical role in providing that credibility so that the sustainability officer in the company has more credibility in the eyes of the legal officer in the company. And I think that's a really important thing that you guys do, is by creating credible data that feeds up and builds better consensus inside the brands and retailers.
No, that's great. I think talking about that shift and then bringing it back around to the value of having the competencies and the certification is really important. And talking about how that could affect brands and retailers, brands and firms, about getting the right people into their organizations. How do you think APSCA certification distinguishes auditors in the competitive global job market with brands and firms that are working and making that shift to prioritize ethical auditing standards. Rajan?
Maybe I should start by going back in time. In 2002, I set up the responsible sourcing program for Walmart, and since then with CNA as well. And all through that time, I did not approve any of the schemes, simply because I just didn't trust the work that's being done. I wasn't sure how they control the audit firms and the quality of the audits being done. Am I going to get caught up with bad audits that then will have an impact on the ecosystem and have an impact on Walmart or CNA, for that matter? And I'm so glad that this conversation about setting up APSCA has been there for a long time. And I'm glad it's here now. I'm glad it's working. And I think it's only going to get stronger and stronger over time. But I think what it really meant is I just didn't have the confidence. I just didn't trust the outcome. I wanted to make sure that I had a finger on the pulse, making sure everything was working right, and the team that I worked with were making sure everything was being done the right way. Now with APSCA in place, and with the CSCAs that have come through, 3,000 people now who are qualified, it just demonstrates that the CSCAs are meeting, again, the word minimum standard and expectations that APSCA have. And it also gives the retail and brand a level of confidence in the work that's being done, and it creates a level of trust with audit firms, and more importantly, the CSCA. Right? It's not just by the audit firms, it's by the CSCAs themselves. And it displays that the CSCA is a professional who is competent at what they do. So, I think we are working our way through all of this. I think it's going to be the way forward, and it's going to build a level of confidence amongst the retail and brands that utilize our audits.
If I just may add, because you said it's also the CSCAs themselves. I really do hope that when you pass all the 3 exams, you have that title, you're proud. Because you really, really should be proud about that achievement, because we know the Part 3 exam is not easy, but it's doable, and it shouldn't be easy either. So you should also be proud about that profession and really carry that flag, say, about this is what I do, proud of it, I contribute, I add value. I think that's something to be said.
Linda, I don't know if you noticed as you were saying that, I was looking out of the crowd, and several people were smiling and nodding along, and I can see who the CSCAs are out there, and I know they are proud.
That's one of our favorite things at APSCA, when we get an email from the CSCA that says, I passed my Part 3. We all cheer for you. We really appreciate that. I want to go back to what Rajan started talking about, which was trust. And I think that we have a big role to play in building trust with auditors, firms, brands, and our stakeholders. How do we do that in those global supply chains? Craig, could you talk to us about that?
Yeah, sure. So I work with a lot of companies on looking holistically at their supply chain risk across a number of different topics. And if you have to put yourself, part of what I always try to do is put myself in the shoes of each different stakeholder. So if I'm in the shoes of a supply chain officer at a large company, I have tens of thousands of suppliers, and I need to determine where to focus. And I often refer to this as the breadth and depth approach. So where do I go in depth? But then I have to make sure that when I'm going in depth, that I'm using competent, qualified people to be able to get the results that I need. Right? If I have 20,000 suppliers, we cannot, or typically they don't audit every one of them. There's some kind of logic that they're using to risk-based approach to determine who they're actually going to audit. The key to that being successful, of course, is a good criteria for knowing where to go in depth. But even more important is to know that what they get when they go in depth can be trusted and is credible. And this comes up in a couple different ways. So one way, we've talked before about the regulations and the growing number of regulations. That's one key thing. But the other thing is increasing customer pressure. So I'm working right now with a tier 1 multi-billion-dollar automotive supplier. And they said and they have manufacturing in 20 countries. Some of it they own, some of it's joint venture, some of it's contract. They said for the first time ever, the automotive OEMs are coming to them and saying, if you don't improve your social compliance in your supply chain, we're going to shift to different suppliers. First time ever. They didn't say that 5 years ago. They certainly didn't say that 10 years ago. They're hearing that now. So that puts them in somewhat of a crisis mode, right? They're starting to think, how do we quickly start to move ahead? What do we do quickly to make rapid improvement here? And to do that, they need organizations like the audit firms we have here that are providing credible data, that have good governance in place, and they need you as individuals to know that what is being done on the ground is credible and is thorough.
That's great. It sounds like, we heard some stories from the board earlier today about how long many people have been involved in the industry, and it sounds like we're at a formative place now where we're starting to see like a big peak again, where changes are happening and people are looking toward making those internal organizational changes that you were talking about. I'd like to kind of bring it back to the certification, and I have a question for you, Avedis, because you brought up the Bar Association before and kind of values about certification. What distinguishes APSCA certification from other qualifications that exist in social compliance auditing?
That's a great question, Stephanie, and I'll take maybe a couple of cuts at it. Several of my colleagues here mentioned the defining feature of APSCA certification, which is that it simply sets that minimum standard, right? It is the bar you have to cross. The reason bar associations are called that goes back to ancient England. When you walk into a courtroom, there would be a bar that would separate where the hoi polloi could sit from where the lawyers could then go into the well of the chamber, and you had to be able to cross that bar to get in there, right? Same idea. We're setting the bar for what it takes to call yourself a social auditor. It sounds like we're saying this is a minimalist thing, but it's not, because we know how hard it is to cross that bar. And so the unique feature of APSCA is that it is that bar. It is the mark that distinguishes those who can call themselves auditors from those who can't. There are all kinds of other qualifications out there that talk about specific types of skills, that talk about knowledge in a particular area, that qualify them to do work for a particular program, like RAP or amfori. And those are all good. Those are all good credentials to have. But to be able to say that you are a social auditor is a prerequisite for all of those credentials. So in that sense, I think what distinguishes APSCA's sort of credential, the CSCA, from all of the others is that, quite frankly, without that, the rest have no meaning. Right? You're not going to be an expert in corporate law without first being a lawyer. You're not going to be an expert in any kind of law without first being a lawyer. And so you're not going to be credentialed as an auditor in any area of knowledge or expertise without first being able to call yourself an auditor to begin with. So that's, I guess, the distinction of the APSCA qualification versus all of the others.
May I just add one thing here? And I think it's also about the word sharing. Many of the schemes we share auditors. And we know that we can trust you because you passed this CSCA exam. You are accountable to holding up your standards. We also know that we don't live in an ideal world. Sometimes things go wrong, and that's when good governance comes into place. And that it's also important that if we have issues when they are identified, and if this at some point in time leads to an auditor being suspended or even revoked, that is also shared as information. So I think that's also what the relevance of APSCA is, that this sharing is there to avoid someone who is in bad standing to continue operating in the space of social compliance auditing. So this sharing element is really important. Equally that it is important, and I think that was also mentioned by the keynote speaker, about sharing of information. This is one element. But it's also the sharing of information within collective schemes to avoid that we audit the same facility over and over and over again. So I think that's also a matter of sharing your credentials, but also the way schemes are being set up to avoid that we do things too often.
You made an excellent point, Linda, and I want to take it in a different direction to sort of build on something I said in the answer to the first question, which is, as a profession, so we've set that bar, not everyone can call themselves an auditor, but as a profession, you also want to make sure that everyone who can call themselves that is worthy of continuing to be able to call themselves that. So truly, professionals don't want to keep within their ranks somebody who is no longer worthy of that appellation. Which is why, for example, again, to borrow from the bar associations, one of the professional conduct requirements for lawyers is to report if a lawyer has done something unethical or has done something unprofessional. Same as we require within the APSCA world. Because as professionals, we not only know how hard it is to get past that bar, but how important it is to continue to maintain the standards that got us there throughout that career. This is what distinguishes a profession from an activity. And it's important that we are able to continue doing that as APSCA and as individual members and auditors within that APSCA world. So,
I love that you keep referring to professional conduct. I'm getting so excited about that. I do want to go back and just steal a little bit from Linda. She talked about sharing, and we do have many auditors who are also shared with firms too, because they're subcontractors and freelancers. And we also have excellent full-time auditors as well. So I was wondering, in which ways does APSCA certification help firms and brands identify trusted, qualified auditors in different global regions? Rajan, would you like to talk about maybe firm perspective?
Sure. So the last 3 years has been a bit of a tough gig to try to get people through the exams, right? So you sit part 1, part 2, and then part 3, sometimes numerous times before you got there. One of the things that we, BV, realized was that there was a block, a mental block in some of the auditors, especially in certain countries. You think, wow, they really just flew through this. And then in some other countries like China and Vietnam, they just sailed through the exams, right? But some other countries you think they would do well, pass, did not happen. And so we started to dig into what was happening. Is that sometimes once you've been doing this job for 10, 15 years, you think, I know it all. I'm not going to read any documentation from APSCA. I'm not going to, I'm just going to go in there and wing it. Wing it doesn't work. Wing it, you have to just make sure that you go back to when you were at school. Read, learn, understand the basics, right? And then we would then help auditors, go through each step and ask them mock questions or whatever, just to get them prepared. And then all of a sudden you see the light bulb go off, because we made them think, and they were just not giving answers, but they had to think about what was being said and respond to the question, because there were clues in the question. And that opened up the auditors to think in a different way and reapply, and they're now starting to get through the exams, right? And that's congratulations to you. At least you're able to reconfigure and restart the process in your brains, and not get caught just saying that I just know it all. So that's good. But having gone through all these different exams now and getting through it, it just basically, you're proving to yourself that you are credible, you are competent. You are good at what you do, and you're a professional now, and you therefore, you should put your head up high and maintain it. Does it mean that you're not going to make a mistake as you move forward? You will make a mistake, for sure. But it's about learning from that mistake as you move forward, too. All of us make mistakes, including Avedis.
There's no proof of that.
And one important thing to add to all of this is that as you move forward, there's this CPD requirement of 48 hours a year. And it's something that will help make sure that you continue to develop as a profession, professionalism in your job. CPDs are important. CPDs will be measured, and we will ensure that everyone's not just repeating the same CPDs year after year. There'll be new CPDs that will be added to give you new experiences, new learnings that will help you grow as a professional auditor.
Yeah, let me just add something, because as Avedis said in the beginning and as Ross said, your job is really difficult, right? There's attitude, skills, and knowledge that are required. There's emotional intelligence that's required. There are the ability to interview people from managers to supervisors to workers. These are really challenging skills. One of the things that I'm really advocating on the board, and that as a board we're really excited about, is to be able to learn from you, to be able to collect and aggregate data that we can look to see what the trends are in the marketplace, what are the issues that you're facing, and then we can help to develop new content so that the continuing education is specific to the types of things that you're facing in the field. We don't want you to think about it as an academic exercise. This should be practical, knowledge-based training that gives you that whole cycle of continual improvement that is really critical for you to stay current and to be able to address and spot the things in the field that are emerging in different markets.
I think that's great. We always talk about like the exam journey or things kind of compartmentalized, but the auditor journey doesn't end with the certification. It goes through as to what all the points that you've been able to expand on here, into that investment of yourself and making yourself more professional. And, you know, it's not the perfect road, like Rajan said, but there's a lot of tools that APSCA has that can help with that, and that's why we're here. I did want to ask, I'm starting to look at the questions online. Thank you for starting to submit those. Make sure you submit those through Slido. And I have one that's been asked, but it's how does APSCA's certification process contribute to professionalism? And so I wanted to ask a little bit bigger question that adds on to that. How does APSCA's certification process contribute to consistent and rigorous standard of professionalism in social compliance auditing? Linda, would you like to take that?
I would say work in progress here. I am at the Stakeholder Advisory Board now, I think, for a bit more than 3 years, or a bit longer. I think APSCA is still on a journey, and I think we're seeing that. And I think we also need to be honest about what APSCA is and where we still would like to move forward to. The CSCA journey also didn't start that long ago. And so we are at great numbers now, and they were shown earlier by Adira. There is more CSCA auditors to be added. So if we are going to be able to measure the impact yet we have there, I think that's too soon to tell. I can only share with you that I have trust in the system. I can only say that within APSCA, also within the conversation we have within the Stakeholder Advisory Board as well as the Board of Directors, we're looking into the data and actively identifying where is it that we need to do better. And one thing that we need to do better, and that was also addressed, I think, actually by you, we start talking. We need to start talking more about what we're doing well already, and where we are still working on to continuous improvement. Because also continuous improvement is relevant for APSCA itself. And so we need to, celebrate our successes, absolutely true, but also acknowledge where we need to work on more.
Wonderful. I know that Ross gave a really great review of the 2024 experience for APSCA and what we've accomplished thus far. And I wanted to just dive into our professional conduct and commitment to impartiality and professional conduct. How does building on those pillars conduct and foster long-term trust in not only APSCA, but in auditor competency and findings? Avedis, do you have any thoughts?
Sure. Look, the definition of a professional is really built on two pillars. Right? You have to be good at what you do. That's the competence part. and you have to be trustworthy. That's the integrity part. That's what makes you a professional, competence and integrity. So when you are assessing an auditor, yes, of course, you want them to be honest, right? But I don't mean to be mean. An honest idiot isn't going to help you, right? And you absolutely want them to be very good at finding things. But somebody who is good at finding things, but can be prevailed upon to change their mind about what they found for some monetary incentives, is not going to help you either. What you want is that somebody who is good at finding things and who you can trust to be able to have the integrity to report them as he found them or she found them. That's a professional. So when APSCA goes out there and tells the world we are the guardians of that professional conduct, we are saying, in effect, that we are looking for the competence and the integrity, and they are each important, and they each work in tandem with the other. And so when we heard from Ross, and I know Stephanie, he called out how great the staff are, and the work you guys have been doing has been tremendous. About the 300 cases we had this year, and a lot of them are about abuse of trust, but also about competence. That's what we're talking about. We are guardians of the profession because we are making sure that those that fall short on either of those pillars, integrity or competence, are no longer going to be allowed to carry that badge of honor that is a CSCA, and gives them the ability to be trusted to go out there and do audits for us. So that's the role. Professional conduct is about competence, integrity, and that's what APSCA is being the guardian of.
Maybe just because I think it's an important point to make here, because we're talking here a lot about the integrity of the auditors. But an important element, equally important if you look at the figures, is the integrity and the good oversight and governance of the member firms. So in those cases, and I don't have I don't know the numbers by heart, but it's a mixed bag. It's integrity of both, say, governance, oversight at member firms, where things can go wrong, as well as with individuals. And just want to make that clear, that we're not only talking about the integrity of the individual.
I think that what Linda said is really a key point. And APSCA, to me, as the independent, the outsider on the board, it's really those two pillars. One is the competency and integrity of the auditor, but two is the governance of the firm itself. And it's those two together that create the credibility. You can't have one or the other. And the other thing that is really interesting in what you all do, earlier in my career, I did work with Social Accountability International, and I had the pleasure of working with Doug DeRousseau and Jane Huang to help to build up some of the early auditor training. And one of the things that Doug, who just passed away recently, always taught me was that when you're auditing, it's rare that you see black and white situations. He said a lot of what you're going to see are shades of gray out in the field. And integrity is critical because shades of gray, black or white, are easy to identify. It's shades of gray where integrity becomes so important, because you don't want to be shifting it and making it a little bit whiter and whiter and whiter when it really isn't. And that's where the integrity becomes really, really important. And that's something that I think is not only the individual, but also the firms. Right? You want the firms to encourage you to be as honest as possible in what you're reporting. Not to say, hey, why don't you not look at that quite as much because that's a big client and we don't want to upset them, or things like that.
I think what's important for firms to also take on is not just say, now I've got a CSCA, so therefore it's all done. But they need to, the word governance was used, and we need to send people out to do witness audits and also to do validation audits. Validation audits basically means somebody goes into a factory, does an audit, 2 weeks later, you send the integrity team in there to repeat the entire audit and see whether they find exactly what the auditor found or were there gaps. Maybe the gap was a genuine mistake, you can then teach. Otherwise, there might be an integrity issue that you uncover. And so it's important that there's governance within the audit firms who take this seriously and support the success of the auditor, the success of the firm, and success of all the schemes that we're working with, and the retail and the brand. So I think it's critical that there are additional steps being taken, and constantly monitoring the results that you get from each audit, and see what this looks a bit weird or strange or too good to be true, and also sometimes you get the other way where a particular audit is just scored pretty badly, and there's also sometimes it's a red flag. So it's constantly monitoring what results you get is important.
Oh, thank you. I think that going to what Linda and Craig both have said, having it's myth busting a little bit to say that we're not just focused on governance of auditors, we're focused at APSCA on governance of firms.
Yeah.
And I think that we'll have some more metrics and more discussions throughout the course of the conference to help shine a light on that and tell our story a little better. So if you are up for it, let's look at some online questions, because we've had some audience questions already come through. And I'd like to start off with one that is going back to the CSCA process. And it says, APSCA auditors go through a process before becoming a CSCA. And how do we communicate to suppliers and public about the value of APSCA in the area of ethics? So I think that really focus on how do we communicate that professional conduct, the ethics, and the journey of the auditor, how that combines. Is that too big of a question?
It's a big question, and it's one that we tackled during the board conversation as well, in the sense of as this industry raises its profile among factories and the general public, we're going to, as APSCA, have to do a better job of communicating that value and the importance of that credential, because you don't, as an average member of the public, yet have any reason to know about APSCA or about the existence of the professional standard, right? The profession hasn't been around that long. When lawyers were, as a guild in their infancy, and bar associations were coming up, it was the same story. People did not know about the association, so we're in that building phase. I think the more important part of that question is in messaging out to the world, when you go out there as professionals and do an audit, that's what gives that audit its credibility, its weight, as opposed to somebody else saying, I'm going to come and ask you a bunch of questions and say everything's okay here. Right? Again, it's almost, right now it's inconceivable for us, for example, if we wanted to go and get medical attention, we would make sure the person we're seeing is a doctor. We're not going to say, oh yeah, you look like you're good with a saw. Cut me open and see if you can take out this tumor. We're not going to do that. We're going to naturally say, no, it has to be a surgeon. And to build on the story, the analogy that Linda and Craig brought out, we're going to want it to be done in a hospital, in a controlled environment with an actual sort of superstructure to manage the individual that's doing the medical procedure. So that is something that's still somewhat in its infancy, and we're developing that in the audit space. You don't want just anybody working for with no supervision. You want a competent auditor engaged by a professional firm that's doing the work and giving you the assurance you need that it's being done properly. So.
And then to add on to Avedis' story, you also want to make sure that the procurement department in the hospital wasn't accepting bribes to get substandard equipment that they're going to install in your body.
And if I may add, and sorry to downplay it a bit here, because the question was about how do we communicate the value. I think that's where we need to get better at. And that was also, part of the discussion we had within the stakeholder advisory board, within a board of directors. How do we communicate our value better? What is our value proposition? What is the messaging towards the different groups that we interact with? And we haven't done a good enough job in that yet. So that's where we need to work on hard next year with the APSCA team, with everyone here, to get that story more broad to the point, to have those conversations and make sure they will also be consistent in how we talk, because that's also sometimes a challenge, that we have different perceptions or different stories or different definitions around what is the value of a CSCA or not. So that's where we need to work on, and that's work in progress.
And as part of these auditor roundtables starting today, we want to hear from you as CSCAs. What do you think makes you better? Why are you better at your job than somebody is it? What is it in the process that you went through that is going to make you more effective? We want to hear from you so that we can integrate that into our messaging to the other stakeholders.
I think it's important to hear what they want us to communicate back to suppliers and factories. So I think it's important to get that voice clear. So we need to continue to communicate.
I think that's great. In fact, I was going to say, what are the takeaways for a firm that wants to talk to a brand? What's a good talking point to express that value? I know we're building that, and we want to hear from the CSCAs and just from all the auditors and even the firms that are here today about where you're struggling in those areas. Because there will, in addition, we'll have C-firm meetings at the same time today at the end of today's session. So it's really important for us to look at how to tell that message from the firm's perspective too, when they're talking to brands and stakeholders. Okay, I'm going to give you guys another question. Are you ready? So this is more about, I guess, being innovative and thinking ahead, because we do have the value propositions that we're working on expanding. What future innovations or improvements would we expect from APSCA in maintaining excellence in social compliance auditing? Anyone?
I'll start on this quickly. One of the things that I think is really critical for APSCA in the future is better data integration and better data sharing. And one of the things that we'll be doing in 2025 is really starting to enhance our data system for the benefit of all of you, for brands, retailers, audit firms, regulators. That's an important part, because as you are going out in the field and doing the work, getting that data back, being able to synthesize it, to aggregate it, to be able to share it back into the field to the different stakeholders, to me is really a critical part of APSCA's future. That will help us also with the value proposition. We'll be able to get more insight into what's taking place. Companies across the world, they're all going to data-driven decision-making, right? I deal with supply chain officers, data-driven decision-making. We at APSCA need to invest in our resources to make what you do more effective in collecting data and being able to share back the appropriate data to the appropriate audience.
If I was to add to that, the APSCA team are going to work on the performance that they see through the exams today and identify the issues that auditors are facing by country, by region, by sector, and that will help us figure out what gaps exist and build the right amount of training to support auditors as they move forward to ensure that they actually pass the exams that's in front of them. So in certain countries or region, there are certain struggles. Today, we're not addressing that as well as we should, and CARA is going to be helping us do all of that. And the second part of it is, as well as APSCA is also trying to build a repository for learning and training modules from different organizations such as OECD, ILO, and also the collaborative programs and audit firms. And they will then basically approve the various trainings that are available and the various modules and actually make it part of the CPD as they move forward. I think that's going to be a big win for us.
Great, thank you. So when we're looking at expanding support for auditors, we talked a little bit earlier about some of the regulatory requirements. I think Craig kind of led the conversation on that. So as they're encountering new regulatory requirements and standards, what advice do you have for auditors on working with APSCA? Obviously, we have our code and standards of professional conduct, and that covers a lot of our integrity expectations. But firms and auditors are all going to be coming across these regulations. How do you see the advice that APSCA and the support that APSCA could give helping them with that?
I think there's a whole panel around that topic in the afternoon to some extent. But I also understand it was also touched upon also yesterday in the training session that took place. So I'm not going to have a very comprehensive answer here, but maybe just to start with positive measure. I think the future looks bright in the sense there is going to be a lot of work for every one of us. So I think let's look into the positives. I think the key question is how do we manage? And the key question is also what is, are there going to be different expectations toward what currently is happening? My own view on that one is that the expectations as they are, and as they are in the legislation, are not going to change your profession moving and what you currently do as a social compliance auditor per se. Because you are there to investigate based on standards and identify where there are gaps. Then it's up to the brands and to the schemes to how do you overcome and solve those issues and work on continuous improvement. So your role will stay the same. I think it's up to the brands and the schemes to define what is the role of social audits, what is a credible social audit, how does it fit within the overall due diligence, but also to clarify what it's not. Because that's also sometimes, we spoke about myth busting. A social audit is not the solution to everything. It's just one tool in a toolbox, and it needs to be surrounded by many more tools to give valuable insights, data, based on different data points to really conduct due diligence. So just, I know I'm touching upon a lot of areas here, but, quick answer to that one.
No, I think it goes back to the certification too, and how certification helps in that area.
Yeah, and just to build on Linda's excellent response there, and the question was in the context of regulation that's coming up right now, but to broaden the horizon and say to you, APSCA is a resource and will continue to be, because we have a particular legislation now coming that we're focused on, for example, the training yesterday, but who knows what the future holds, how it will evolve. This is where the parallel to a bar association can be very instructive, because what you serve your constituents with is being that front line for determining how a change in the background environment impacts your professional activities, right? So when bars first got going, technology wasn't really a big thing. Lawyers, worked on with pen and paper, and then along come computers, and how does that now impact what professional behavior looks like with regards to record keeping, with regards to confidentiality, with regards to ensuring that data does not get breached. Bar associations were the first line of defense to set up the standard for here's what the minimum expectations are that you must meet, right? And then again, further on, social media comes along, right? So to maintain my license, I have to take CPDs every year, continuing professional development credits every year, and the bar is the one that says this is the area now that's hot. This is the area that you need to pay attention to. This is the new requirement that you must be aware of. That's the kind of role that APSCA will play and is playing already as a resource to the profession, regardless of what the change is. Here's what it means to you.
And I think that's beneficial to the firm as well as to the auditor, and to the schemes, and really to everybody in the ecosystem.
I know we're very short on time. We have a couple minutes left, and I just wanted to ask if you have any final thoughts on any auditors who are out there who are still on the associated level and are contemplating the value of CSCA going through the certification and the exam process. Would anyone like to touch on that?
Yeah, sure, I'll start off. Look at it from a supply and demand standpoint. There is a whole lot of talk about auditor capacity. There is not enough capacity. Everybody needs more CSCAs to conduct audits. If you go that final step, if you become a CSCA, you have a very, very marketable credential and there are 60 some odd member firms that want to talk to you about doing work for them.
From a practical perspective, now that we have CACAs in the room, their value has gone up financially. Not just the work that they're doing, but financially you're also doing much better than you were. So I think that's a good thing. So if you're an ASCA, if you want to get more money, become a CSCA. That's the way you achieve your financial goals as well.
I think everybody resonated with that. So I thank the board members for being part of this panel, and we're all APSCA and board members here to network with you throughout the conference and hear your ideas and talk with you. So please put your hands together and thank these wonderful people for their insights today. Thank you.
Thank you.